This week on Hometown Ghost Stories. In the 1970s, the Dandy family moved into their quaint dream home in Hinsdale, New York. Almost immediately, a nightmare began. Multiple spirits were seen throughout the house and on the property. An eerie chanting coming from the woods, and even poltergeist activity. It turns out that the house may have been hiding a dark history. Join us as we dive deeper into the history and haunting of the Hinsdale House, New York.
Hometown Ghost Stories contains serious and often distressing events and is not intended for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
August 12th, 1973, Hinsdale, New York. Phil had just left for work. He worked the night shift in Buffalo, and Clara would be left home with their 4 children. Strange things had been occurring in and around the house lately. Clara and the children had been convinced the occurrences were paranormal in nature, but Phil was a firm skeptic. On this particular night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with family friends Darlene and Susan, along with her daughter Beth and Beth's boyfriend Jeff. The conversation was light, and Clara joked about how hard it was for her, a city slicker, to fit in with Phil's hillbilly family when they first met. The laughter was broken by the sound of the telephone ringing. It was Phil, and he sounded upset. He asked if everything was all right with the house. Confused, Clara assured him everything was fine, and asked why the sudden concern. He explained that while driving into work, he broke out in a cold sweat and shook for the rest of the drive. He had a foreboding feeling that something was wrong at the house. Clara found this strange, as it was very unlike Phil to behave like this, but she brushed it off. Shortly after Phil's strange phone call, something else strange happened. Clara and Beth had moved the family's pet parakeets to the front porch for an airing earlier in the day. Out of nowhere, the parakeets started panicking and going crazy in their cages. Clara and Beth hurried out to see what could have been causing them to act in such a frenzy, but there was nothing that would have provoked them. Typically, the birds would do that if there was a sudden wind, but the night air was calm. They brought the birds back into the house, and in doing so, Beth noticed that the birds' food had gotten knocked over. Clara sent her to fetch some more and proceeded to clean the mess. While Clara was situating the birds, she heard Beth scream from the other side of the house. She hurried over and found Beth huddled on her bed. She looked up at Clara and shouted, "It's in the window. Don't look." Clara ran over to the window and slammed it shut. Beth explained that she had climbed up on her desk to retrieve the bird food and happened to glance out the window, where she saw the figure of a person peering into her window. Clara felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She grabbed Jeff's shirt sleeve and pulled him to the front door. "We need to check outside to see who's out there," she explained in a panic. Clara marched around the perimeter of the house towards Beth's window, calling out for whoever was out there to show themselves. Jeff followed behind, but was clearly afraid. As the pair rounded the corner, Beth's window came into view, but there was nobody in sight. Clara cautiously approached Beth's window, and something caught her eye. She looked into the window and was shocked to see the same figure Beth described looking back out at her from inside the room. I'm Dave Wilkins, and this is Hometown Ghost Stories, Hinsdale, New York.
In 1970, Clara and Phil Dandy were looking for a change in scenery from living in Buffalo with their 4 children. They noticed that when they took trips to the country, the family would always get along better, and they were hoping to make that bond feel more permanent. While searching for a house, they would find one in Hinsdale, New York. This small house set off on its own at the end of a road seemed like the perfect place. But the peace they longed for soon gave way to terror. Clara and Phil moved into the house on July 18, 1970 with their children Mike, aged 14, Beth, 13, Laura, 10, and Mary the youngest, aged 8. Tragically, their fifth child, Christina, had passed away as an infant. The family also brought along an eclectic mix of pets, including 2 dogs, a cat named Fluffy, a raccoon called Princess, 4 guinea pigs, 2 parakeets, 2 finches, and a woodchuck named Nipper. They would go on to bring in even more pets, including a skunk named Dolly. Upon arriving to the house, the woodchuck Nipper was freed into the woods, but would often return to visit the family. From the very first day, strange occurrences plagued the family. Despite having visited the house many times before, they arrived to find it swarming with bees. Every trip they had made to the house, they had never seen any until that day. They would call an exterminator who was shocked at the sheer amount of bees in the house. The family was filling grocery bags with the dead bodies of the bees, with many still on the floor. The bees would continue to plague them for months, until they finally moved on. As they were settling into the house, their dogs started bringing in large old bones they found on the property. Thinking this was just the bones of dead animals coming from the wilderness, the family would discard the bones without thinking much about it. Later, they would regret this, as they believed that maybe the bones weren't just from the animals. The first encounter with the supernatural happened when Mike, the eldest child, was walking down the road with 2 friends. They saw a man walking ahead of them they described as a young farmer. Mike chased after him to tell him it was private property, but as he got closer, he realized the farmer was slightly transparent. They watched in disbelief as he walked behind a tree and vanished. The boys rushed back to the house to tell Clara that they saw this man, but she dismissed it and didn't think much of the story. A few days later, Beth and her friend Patricia, usually referred to as Pat, were outside playing. Clara was inside the house when the girls came running in hysterical. They claimed that they had both seen the farmer watching them from the hill. The girls were terrified. At this point, although still skeptical, Clara began to at least take what the children were seeing a bit more seriously. Shortly after these encounters, 3 of the family's pets died in Mary's room within a span of 2 months, with no clear explanation as to why they were dropping dead. And then in 1971, Clara would have her own encounter while walking her dog Lassie in the woods.
Spring, 1971. Twigs snapped underfoot, and branches reached out, clawing at the girls' faces as they sprinted through the dense forest behind the house. The faint orange glow of dusk was almost completely blotted out by the tangle of trees above, shielding the forest from the sky. Beth giggled as she caught up to her friend Pat, who had only been a pace or 2 ahead of her. She heard that her mother and younger sisters had journeyed out with the dogs to explore some phantom chanting that their mother had claimed to have heard the night before. Before they reached the party, Lassie, one of the family dogs, must have heard them coming and intercepted them in their pursuit. The dog excitedly came out of nowhere and jumped up, attempting to smother Beth's face with playful laps of her long tongue. Beth laughed and ruffled the fur of the dog's head. The dog had ruined the girls' plans of sneaking up and scaring the group, but it was impossible to fault the dog in all of her enthusiasm and excitement. The prospect of mysterious chanting in the woods was fairly concerning, but Beth couldn't help feeling enlivened with a sense of adventure. The previous night, Clara, Beth's mother, came home after walking Lassie, going on about a strange chanting sound coming from the woods. She claimed it sounded like a Gregorian chant, like the one that you'd hear at a Catholic Mass. As the group approached the top of the hill, Mary, Beth's younger sister, stiffened and clutched her mother's blouse. That's when Beth heard it. It was loud and clear, voices chanting in a sing-song rhythm. The excitement Beth had been experiencing earlier melted away into an inarticulate sense of dread. There wasn't a single thing that sound could be that would suggest anything positive. Ghosts? A cult? If they were a cult, what were they doing in the woods behind our house? All of a sudden, the chanting stopped, replaced by a moment of deafening silence. Beth glanced around at the faces of her mother, sisters, and friend, all expressions of abject fear, drained of their humanly color. Lassie's hackles were raised and the dog let out a low growl. warning whatever had her on guard not to present itself, whatever it was. Beth jumped as the silence was broken by a man's voice coming from beyond the trees. It was some sort of monotone prayer. It seemed to be English, although the tone was too low for Beth to make out what was being said. It was terrifying. The tone was ominous and threatening. Beth would never forget the look on her friend's freckled face. Pat, as pale as a ghost, clutching her pigtails up above her head, either trying to hear or plain reaction out of nervous energy. Everyone seemed to be on the same page. All 5 members of the party, as well as the 3 dogs, turned back and hurried home.
As time went on, the house, quote, felt like it had an umbrella of fear, horror in the unknown. On these umbrella nights, the atmosphere made my skin crawl, end quote, Clara Dandy. Although they had experiences before, Clara said that things really began to escalate on June 29th, 1973. Around this time in her book, Clara would tell the events in a diary form to help lay out a timeline of the incidents. We highly encourage you to read the book Echoes of a Haunting Revisited, as the encounters we cover here are just some of the highlights, and there's many more occurrences that she describes in the book. At the time this diary starts, Mike is 17, Beth 16, Laura 12, and Mary 11. On June 29th, Clara heard slamming noises throughout the house, and the windows began shutting on their own. Just a few days later, on July 2nd, Clara would be awakened by a scream coming from downstairs. Upon rushing down, Beth was frantically screaming. Beth told her mother she had gotten up to get a drink of water. After returning to her bed, a shadow-like figure attacked her and went for her face. She instinctively grabbed it and threw it on the ground. Upon realizing no sound of the shadow hitting the floor happened, she began to scream. Beth would spend the rest of the night in her parents' room. 2 nights later, Clara woke up to a voice yelling, "Ma!" When she yelled back, Mike told her to come downstairs to his room. She went downstairs and saw Mike's chess set scattered across his room, and Mike was still laying in bed, saying, quote, "I'm not getting out of this bed until you come in this room." Mike had watched in horror as board games and magazines slid across a shelf above his bed before falling on him in the middle of the night. He would spend the rest of the night sleeping on the couch. The very next morning, Beth discovered a tear-shaped burn on her leg. Upon showing it to the family, Mike turned pale. He then showed the family the same tear-shaped burn on his leg. He mentioned discovering it a week beforehand. More burns appeared on other family members and objects around the house throughout the months. Later in the day, while walking in the living room, the family noticed a letter opener had been stabbed into the frame of a picture of Mary, causing Beth to cry out, "Why is it picking on Mary?" On July 6, Mike confided in his friend Craig about the strange occurrences. Craig, intrigued, asked to spend the night. After an uneventful evening, Craig looked out the window and saw a boy walking in the yard. Craig hadn't been told about the ghostly boy, and when Mike and Phil explained that others in the family had seen the farmer boy, Craig began apologizing, saying, "I didn't mean to see him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to see him." Throughout this time, objects would begin to get smashed and thrown throughout the house, and Clara felt what she described as an Arctic cold that drained the warmth from her body, and Beth had been experiencing the same chilling sensation in her bedroom. On Thursday, July 12th, Father Alphonsus, whom the family would go on to refer to as Father Al, visited the house for the first time. After hearing their story, his initial diagnosis was poltergeist. He decided to try and calm the spirits by giving the house a blessing. Despite this, footsteps and knocking persisted, especially in Mary's room. On July 29th, Mary and a friend named Susan were swimming in the pond on the property, along with Beth. While Beth was facing the 2 girls, behind her, Mary and Susan saw a woman across the way dancing near the edge of the pond. They watched the woman and said that she had red curly hair, blue eyes, teeth like a rabbit, and wore what looked like curtains for a dress. The most unsettling detail the girls would share was that her eyes were bulging out of her head, as if she had been hanged. The woman would end up dancing into the tall grass before disappearing, not being seen for the rest of the day. By August 6th, with all the activity in her room, Mary couldn't sleep in there anymore. The family would hear sounds of furniture moving and Mary's bed creaking under invisible weight. The atmosphere in the room was described as if there was a vacuum in there, causing a physical pressure on your ears and temples. Laura also had issues and seemed possessed at times. She told someone she knew she would die young and that it was okay because she had seen everything already. Laura's premonitions unfortunately would come true, and she would die at the age of 31. On August 12th, Phil, once a skeptic, called from work to check on the family, having a bad feeling. He told Clara while driving to work he broke out in a cold sweat and shook during the entire drive. Clara reassured Phil that everything was all right before they finally hung up the phone. Shortly after, the pet bird started acting erratically, and Beth began screaming. As Clara reached her room, Beth was huddled on her bed and screamed out to her mother, "She's in the window! Don't look!" Beth would begin to tell Clara that she went to hang her bird's cage back up, and she saw something near the window. What she saw was a woman with pale white skin, black, filthy wet hair, big dark eyes, and a beckoning hand. The most terrifying part of all is she couldn't tell if the woman was inside or outside of the window. From that point forward, Beth would not enter a room at night unless the window was closed and the shade pulled down. Over the next few weeks, the family would encounter even more haunting activity. A foul odor, reminiscent of dead animals, permeated between Beth and Laura's bedrooms. 2 days later, the stove turned on by itself overnight, and Beth heard voices outside her window. Footsteps and dragging noises in the crawl space also became a regular occurrence. On September 3rd, which was Labor Day, apparitions were seen outside. As members of the family ran outside to find them, the ghostly figures were then seen in Mary and Beth's rooms by multiple witnesses. Beth was still in her room and let out a loud scream. Upon rushing back inside to check on her, Beth described seeing a figure on her bed, and her description matched what Clara had seen through the window from outside. Phil would then go on to open the crawl space and found the chimney had been neatly dismantled and stacked against the wall. Father Al was called, and he said he would be right over. Upon arrival, he witnessed a woman walking by the pond in the same spot the girls had seen the dancing woman. This day would become known to the family as the day that all hell broke loose. A few weeks later, a psychic by the name of Alex Tanis was coming into the nearby St. Bonaventure University for a lecture. The family wanted to attend the lecture and were planning to when they received a call from Father Al. Not only were they going to attend the seminar for free, but Alex was going to go to their house afterwards to see if he could pick up on anything. Upon visiting the house, Alex saw visions of mass murder that happened on the property. He claimed to be able to see 7 spirits, and some were more easily distinguishable than others. Among them were a hanged woman, a man stabbed to death, another woman who was drowned, and a young girl around the age of 18 that was beaten and tortured to death. He said that these deaths had happened over 100 years ago, and the person was picking people off from a stagecoach run nearby and storing the bodies in the crawl space until discarding them. At the end of this session, Alex was visibly drained. The good news for the Dandy family, though, was that after Alex's visit, the house seemed to quiet, at least for a little bit. On October 21st, Mike was involved in a serious car accident. Car accidents and car trouble were nothing new since moving in, but this one was so bad that the family and doctors weren't sure Mike would live. His spleen was removed, and he spent weeks in intensive care. In December, Beth began hearing voices outside her window again. This time, they were growing louder. She told her mother that she could now make out that it was a man and woman talking and could hear them saying her name during the conversations. The conversations would be punctuated with the sound of something striking their oil tank. At the beginning of April, a woman named Jan from New York University called the family and asked permission to come down with Alex the medium and film the story and happenings at the house. Clara agreed, and on April 12th, the film crew arrived along with Alex. During filming, Alex was trying to cleanse Mary's room, and during this, he would end up being burned on his back. They continued to film, and other occurrences, such as lights smashing on their own, would continue to happen. The crew would conclude with performing a ceremony to cleanse the house. Alex, Father Al, the family and film crew held hands in a circle in the living room while it was performed. While Father Al was performing the exorcism rite, Clara said there were, quote, horrible screams and groans outside, which seemed to be coming from the house itself, end quote. Activity would cease for several months after this. On July 7th, while Phil was going into the master bedroom to grab something he had forgotten, he froze in the doorway. As he looked in, a book was floating above a dresser. He stood there as it closely let itself back down onto the furniture. Laura also began seeing spirits again and would become very affected. They would even try to brighten the room's wallpaper to try and cheer the place up and invite positive energy. By August 10th of 1974, both Beth and Mike had moved out. Mike had joined the Navy, and Beth married and moved to California. During all of this time, Phil and Clara were accumulating crippling debt. Come August 24th, Phil and Clara tried to sell the house. During a showing of the place, a couple from Buffalo saw the ghost of a woman at the bird bath in the yard. The Dandys were unable to find a buyer for the property, and October 11th, the family filed for bankruptcy and began moving out. On October 13th, Phil and Clara were alone in the house as the kids were already gone. While laying in bed, a gong started to go off in the cellar. As the couple lay there listening, in rapid succession they heard a baby crying, a whistle, a siren, bells, and finally a repeat of the gong. On October 17, 1974, the family was completely moved out of the Hinsdale House. Despite the hauntings, Clara said she never wanted to leave the house. In fact, she felt as though she was abandoning and betraying the house or the spirits within. The family would eventually relocate to the West Coast. The house itself remains in the small town of Hinsdale, New York. And as Jesse, Dave, and myself discovered during our investigation of the place, the hauntings haven't stopped.
What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome into episode 124 of Hometown Ghost Stories, The Hauntings of the Dandy House. I'm Jesse Wilkins. I'm joined by Rob Coakley. Hello, Rob.
This is one of the craziest hauntings I've ever read about. And although it's known in the paranormal community, it's still relatively unknown to most people. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Hell yeah. We're also joined by Dave Wilkins. Hello, Dave.
Hello. This was unknown to me until you booked it. We're like, we're going here. I'm like, I never heard of it, but it sounds good. And a lot of people in chat were talking about how similar it is to the Conjuring house, not even just the house itself, but the story, which is pretty accurate. You had the family with the kids and the wife seeing things, the father who didn't really believe it. It was right around the same time, 1970, 1971, relatively close geographically.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm always wrong about that.
I mean, driving distance, I guess.
Yeah.
If you look at the entire United States, they're relatively close to each other. But if you're driving from one to the other, it's going to take you a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody who hung out in live chat, everyone who checked out the actual live investigation, which if you want to see more about what we saw inside that house, that episode is out on YouTube as well. So you can search that. It is not on the podcast feed, but if you're an audio listener, definitely come by on YouTube and check that out. We put a lot of work into it and got a lot of good feedback so far. So we're excited about that. It was a fun one. Before we dive into this, because this is a long one, this is a crazy story. And obviously we've been there. So this is one of those that we experienced ourselves. I want to thank everyone who donated. These donations were flowing in before the stream even started today, but we got Crazy Legs came in with 5, Potato came in with 5, Tess came in and gifted 50 Hometown Ghost Stories memberships. Blow Me in Chicago gave us 5, and then Crazy Legs came back in with another 5, and then Potato came in to gifted $2 for the Rob's neck fund, which is growing. Unfortunately, his neck is not, but he'll get there eventually. Just absolutely generous donations from you guys. We do appreciate it. We did, as we predicted, and as we hoped would happen, we hit an all-time high of most live concurrent viewers, and we're still holding strong. So I appreciate that. And thank you guys all so much for joining. And again, those donations help with those types of things because live investigations, they are pricey with all the travel and everything like that. So more to come for sure.
And thanks to all our patrons and thanks to our RIP this week. Really important platypus, really important person, however you want to phrase it. It's Jennifer P. She's been with us for a long time and she does a lot of great work with animals and stuff too. So thank you, Jennifer P, for being a Patreon member.
Nice. Yeah. A lot of pets in this story. My favorite part of this entire video was just your highlight reel banging through all these different animals. I'm like, all right, Rob contacted the entire stock footage of like zoo animals. It was amazing.
I had to. So the reason I said all the animals that they went in there with, and they ended up getting more dogs and skunks and all this other stuff, because we've been to this house now, right? And we know that this was a family of 6 living in this house. So not only was it 6 people, but all of these pets were in this house as well. It must have almost been suffocating because it's not a big place by any means.
No, not at all. This is one of the smaller houses that we have investigated. And like we mentioned in the investigation episode towards the end there, that all of the energy that we could feel, like that heaviness, was ubiquitous throughout the house, and it might have had something to do with the size of it.
Right. Yeah. I also, to that point, Dave, Clara, her explanation of what it felt like in that house was really revealing as well. She said that it feels like certain nights there's an umbrella, like that's like covering the activity into the house. Right. And I kind of understand what she means by that, where maybe some nights it's fine. But when we were there, the one thing that we can say is I think we're all in agreement. It's the one location we've ever been to that you feel it inside the house in every single room, but you also feel it on the property, like something is just surrounding you the entire time that you're there, sort of like an umbrella. So I thought that was an interesting comp from her.
Yeah, the umbrella was a pretty good metaphor to use for that. I kind of definitely agree.
Yeah. So yeah, there's so much that happened at this house. We basically just did a highlight reel of the things that went on. Highly suggest you go read the book Echoes of a Haunting Revisited. If you only find Echoes of a Haunting, which she wrote the book and then she re-released it with a few more things in it. I think you could do without the few extra things. It wasn't too much, but either of those, you can get the entire story of what happened to this family and get the actual details. There's a lot of misinformation about what happened here. A lot of people think the family only lived here for a year and a half. They lived here for 4 years. I think they're getting confused by the fact that the general amount of activity that happened was that 1973 to 1974 when she started going to diary form. And the other thing that people say, and I think it's just to make the story better, is the family was so scared they left the house. She clearly states in her book that despite all the hauntings, she didn't want to leave the house. They lost it. It's tough. They were trying to work in Buffalo. Dave, we did the drive to Buffalo, right? Like trying to do that every day. Doable, but probably exhausting over some time. So I get why it didn't end up working out for them.
Yeah, for sure. And the tragic ending to the story too, even though it wasn't a tragic ending with regard to the haunting, but as far as the family have to file bankruptcy, file divorce, another actual similarity to the Conjuring House story. That family ended a similar fate.
Yeah. I will say the one thing that I did like that Clara emphasized in her book is the divorce wasn't because of the hauntings. She looks back now and basically says there was no way that her and Phil, whether they lived in the haunted house or not, were ever going to make it long term. So at least she's not saying because of this house and because of the hauntings we got divorced. There was a whole separate bag of issues for that.
I'm sure. And I'm sure that the bankruptcy probably had more to do with it than the haunting.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta think though, if it's a stressful situation, you're trying to keep the marriage together, you're living on top of each other in this house. It's so small. All of that stress in a tiny little house like that, plus the fact that it's haunted, poltergeist, you got to deal with poltergeist activity, floating books, all sorts of crazy stuff going on, chanting coming from the woods. Yeah, I would imagine that doesn't help with the situation. Real quick, just shout out to Apple Steph, just threw $2 in super chat with a bunch of little ghost emotes. Thank you so much, Apple Steph. And then Potato Geist actually came in and dropped the $2 right there. Boom. The welcome sandwich with Rob Loaf. Sounds delicious.
Let's talk about the chanting a little bit in the forest, because when we were there, we heard something in the forest as well, and it wasn't chanting. It was like this scream almost, right? And I don't know, dude. Jesse, tell us about the haunted forest, because you were forced to walk around it by yourself.
Yeah, overall, I mean, like we heard that noise, and we had mentioned it in the little discussion portion of that episode where we were trying to debunk it maybe as like coming from the highway and or one of the busier roads close by. There aren't that many roads that close by, and when we were driving them that around that time of night, they were not busy, and this noise was it wasn't on like a timer, but it was consistently coming from the woods, and it did sound like a far off scream almost.
Yeah.
It didn't sound like an animal. Didn't sound like a noise that a car would make, but we tried to maybe debunk it as that, but never got clarification on what that was. The worst part of it was we didn't start hearing it until right before I was set to go into the woods by myself. I was like, sick, this is great. This is fantastic. But going in there, I was the only one that hadn't gone into the woods yet. I don't think Andrew had either at the time, which, by the way, shout out to Andrew who joined us in the investigation. People were wondering, like, who the hell's holding the camera? If we could see all three of you, it was Andrew. He joins us on most of our investigations, and he was a big help. But so I hadn't gone in there, and there was a lighted path, and you could see it if you watched the video, but there was a path that, you know, with a couple lights that led you into the woods, maybe 6 or 8 lights. And then it stops, and then you just got to kind of figure it out. Little did I know, that tree that I was looking for was a straightaway shot. I immediately veered off to the right because I saw a clearing, and then I got myself basically lost in the woods. I wasn't that far away from the house, so I wasn't like that scared of being actually lost, but I figured I could figure it out if I had just walked down the hill, because it was also a hill that you were basically climbing when going in there. But the strange things that I got there, other than those noises, was I saw an orange glowing light.
Yes.
And snapped a picture. I couldn't see it on the night vision camera. And it wasn't until later when I looked back at my pictures that I realized I did get a picture of it, and we included that as well. So I at first thought maybe it was another one of those little lights on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But as I made my way up, I never found another one of those lights. Also, it was at like eye level. So it was maybe 6 to 7 feet off the ground, because I'm incredibly tall. So my eye level, and it was actually really bright in the picture. So it actually came out pretty good. But so I don't think it was one of those ground lights because it was too high up. I would say maybe it was a reflection, but I didn't have a light going at that time. So I was just using the infrared night vision camera when I snapped that picture. So maybe if I was shining the flashlight, it could have reflected off something that maybe had been hanging on the tree, but it felt like it was too far away for that, and it was too bright. But it was an experience in the woods. It was terrifying, more so just because I didn't really know where I was going, didn't even really know what I was looking for. I knew there was a tree that had some sort of things hanging from it. I guess people go out there and they leave offerings for the Native American spirits, and they leave tobacco products as well as hanging these different things from the tree. But running into that tree in the middle of the night was scary. And the weird thing was I found a second tree first that was it had some stuff. So I thought that was the one. And then I moved over to my right and I was like, whoa, wait a second, there it is. So overall, I don't really know what that light was, and I don't know what the sound was. Could it have been cars? Maybe. Could it have been animals? Maybe. But I've never heard an animal that sounded like that or a car that sounded like that. So I don't really know. But it wasn't chanting. So I didn't experience that. I wish I did. I'm kind of glad I didn't. But for the show, I wish I did.
Yeah. So I want to go back to this light because when I was researching this place before we went there, like I said, there are so many different hauntings, spirits, things that have happened here. I was giving you guys notes and on everything. The one thing I didn't write down was the lights, because I would have just essentially been rewriting the book if I had gone through and done every single haunting. So I didn't even mention them to Jesse or Dave. And I honestly forgot about the lights that people had seen there too. People had seen these mysterious lights in the woods. You can read it in the book as well. And so when you came back and you showed us that picture, whenever you showed us that picture, I was like, oh, that's one of the things that happens here. And you guys were like, you didn't mention that. I'm like, yeah, because there's so many things I forgot until you actually captured it. So I was kind of taken aback by, well, that and amongst a bunch of other stuff that happened here. But that one was really startling because you didn't even know that was something to look for. And boom, it just happens while you're out there.
So one of the only other investigations that we did where we explored the outside of the house was the Oliver house. And this is another thing that we actually caught at the Oliver house. And it was the same exact thing. It was an orange glowing light that was not at ground level. And I think it was Potato who mentioned that it could have been an eye reflection from an animal, which it could have been. But again, maybe if it was in a tree, maybe. But it also only got one ball of light. I didn't catch both eyes, but it's completely possible. Like I said, all of this stuff that we got here, we're not the type of show that's going to be like, it's definitely paranormal. It's definitely a ghost. It's up to your interpretation. You look at the evidence that we caught. We try to give it to you pretty much straight. And could it have been paranormal? I don't know. I didn't have a rational explanation for it. So I've seen animals' eyes reflecting in the woods. You usually know what you're looking at when you see those. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I don't really have an explanation for it. But I had seen it briefly and then it went away, so it wasn't something that I was like scared about. And I also never found the source.
So there's a couple other things I want to touch on before we completely dive into the investigation. Some things that I left out of this episode that I thought were worthy of talking about still. One is car troubles. When you read this book that she talks about, it is filled from the time they move into the house of their car breaking down, other people's cars breaking down, car accidents. Like for that 4 years, it's just nonstop. And it really made me think of other cases like Annabelle. Like, there was a lot of car accidents with her amongst other curses that we've heard of. So I found that intriguing and makes me wonder what's actually haunting this place. And there's this whole newspaper thing that I left out, but a newspaper reporter, ended up asking them if he could run a story on the house about the hauntings and stuff, because it had gotten out a little bit because of them going to Father Al and stuff. And she's like, you can put it out there. You can take a picture of the house, which I found very strange. But she's like, but please don't say our name or where our address is. But she let him take a picture of the house. So like, if you know the house, you're going to figure it out, right? So immediately everybody figures it out. And for months, people were driving from as far as Buffalo to come to their house and drive up. And some people would just drive up to their house and go, we don't believe in ghosts. And then leave.
That's a long trip for that short heckle. You got to commit.
Yeah. Like, what do we, or they would drive up like, show us the ghost. And they actually had friends that were coming and working as like security guards for them, chasing people away from the house at night because of how insane it was.
I don't get why people do this. Like, I understand if it hits the news and it's a craze and you're like, oh, I want to see the haunted house. But what do you expect to happen?
Right.
You show up to show me your ghost. Like, this isn't a haunted house attraction. Like, it's not like, oh, there we go. All right, go scare that guy now. Like, go ahead out there, ghost. Come on, that random person that just showed up at my house wants to do that. Like, it's a family that lives there. You know, we're fortunate enough with a lot of these places where they've basically turned themselves into museums or turn themselves into locations where they host paranormal investigations. So it's these stories that had these crazy these crazy tales back in the, whatever 70s or 80s. And then now you're able to go experience it for yourself, and you're able to do it the right way. You get permission, you pay the fee, you do what you got to do. And these fees with a lot of these houses are the only thing that is helping them to stay upright, because a lot of these places will get knocked down if there's not money coming in to keep the place, renovated and everything. Right. Sharon V coming in, dropping $40 in super chat. Thank you so much, Sharon V. Absolute legend. Also, legend on Patreon. Thank you so much. And I believe we got one more from Crazy Legs as well. Another $2 donating to Rob's V6 fund. So they probably had a V6. That's probably why they were breaking down.
Yeah. I like how he donated $2 to that, one for each cylinder. You'd have to add.
That's right. Perfect. Yeah.
Before we get off this topic of people going and vandalizing and terrorizing haunted houses, when we were in Hinsdale, we actually ran into a local at one of the local restaurants, and I promised I wouldn't use her name for obvious reasons. You'll see, but she said we could share a story. So she lived in Hinsdale for her whole life, and when she was younger, she remembers when the story was big, when it was going on in the 70s, and she and a bunch of her friends in high school, they drove down to the house one night, and they were just being reckless teenagers, and they smashed all the windows of the house and then left. Not a cool thing to do. We don't endorse that. But she said that they went back the next night, and all of the windows, none of them were broken. They were not replaced. It would be very difficult to replace all those windows in one day, first of all. And second of all, they weren't replaced. It was the same windows. They were old windows, and they were so freaked out. She said they never went back.
Yeah, and I don't know if you clarified at the beginning, sorry, but the house was vacant at the time.
Right. This was after the family had moved out.
Right. So, yeah, it was a crazy story, and this is very much a place. So what you do when you go to Hinsdale is you actually go to Olean. Is that how they pronounced it? Olean?
I think it's Olean.
Olean. That's right. You go to Olean, and that's like the closest like real town. Hinsdale is insanely small, right? We drove up to the one restaurant that I think the town had and had been closed. So we had to like go to Olean to even eat dinner there. But everyone that we talked to in Olean had a story about the house or knew about the house, or, there was different things. So it's a really cool small town that they embrace it for the most part from everyone that we had talked to anyway. So that's very cool.
Everybody knew about it. It's the Hinsdale House. It's obviously not on the level of fame that Amityville is, but when you think of Amityville, you think of the Amityville House. And It seems that people saw the shirts and they saw, they came over and everyone just had a ghost story to tell. Every single place that we went, they came up and just offered their ghost stories. Some of them related to the Hinsdale House, some of them related to other properties around. There was like a mob hit at a ski lodge that was close by that they told us about, which we'll probably save that one for a future episode or side content. But the story was nuts, and the haunting, there seems to be a haunting reputation. I think the property is now abandoned, so that'd be a cool one to set something up. Andrew P coming in, dropping $5 in super chat, says the episode absolutely terrified me. I won't be sleeping tonight. It will be a crime it would be a crime not to donate. So thank you so much, Andrew P. Absolute legend.
So I want to hit on two more things with this house. One is very quick. Clara made it a point to say that a lot of the stuff that happened in this house happened during the day. Just to clarify that, because you always think night, but a lot of their instances did happen during the day as well. So this isn't just a night haunting thing. This happened during the daytime, such with the pond where they saw the girl dancing over there. And the other story I just want to touch on real quick, and I forgot if it was Beth or Laura. I believe it was Beth. On New Year's Eve of 1973 going into 1974, they were having like a little party, and they thought she had taken 10 muscle relaxers. Turned out she had only taken one, but they rushed her to the hospital, and she was acting like she was possessed that night. And the doctors notated that when she went to the hospital, she had come in, I believe, with blue eyes. And then when she started acting normal again, her eyes turned back to brown.
Oh.
And this was notated by the doctor. So, because the doctor found it fascinating. So her eye color had changed when they thought that she was sort of possessed or something like that. So very strange.
I've never heard of that happening before. Is that a thing? Can people's eye color change?
People's eye color can change. That is a thing that happens, but I don't think it happens in this manner, is what I would say. So
just to clear it up, Al Capone says that he has not been to that place, so the mob thing was not him.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. Thank you, Al.
Clear that up. Not a Capone mob hit at the ski lodge.
Yeah. So we kind of hit on all the stuff that we were going to talk about with the Dandy family. Let's dive into a little bit more of our investigation. I know we've talked about your woods insanity. I just want to say this too, Jesse, as we were reviewing the footage, fully expected you to just walk right up to that tree like you said. I did not expect it to be at the end of the foot. I'm like, how is he not at this tree yet?
Straight up couldn't find it.
I was just like, dude, how is that?
Literally like a straight walk, maybe 50 yards, it would have been there. I wandered off to the right.
It was amazing.
Into, got attacked by thorns.
Thorns.
Dangerous journey. I was actually pretty disappointed because I thought I walked into like an entire thorn bush. Like it pierced through my pant leg and cut me a little bit. I was like,
oh, are you all right?
And then I looked down. It's the most pathetic little thorn branch. I'm like, oh, I couldn't have been like a whole thorn bush or like I couldn't have got bit by an animal or something more brave. But we got through it together. Well, not together. I got through it by myself.
That was my favorite part of the video. It's just a stupid little stick with thorns.
Tiniest little thing.
Just one sprout coming out of the ground.
Yeah. It literally grew right there. It's like, pop, gotcha, Jesse. That's how thorns talk. I don't know if you guys ever wondered, but yeah.
Let's talk about our group investigation in the living room, which a lot of our live viewers right now and some people that are listening on the podcast probably saw. We try to do a live investigation from one of the rooms when we go to places, and this was probably the craziest one we've done. I mean, this is one of the craziest investigations we've done, but in terms of just the absolute live, this was like we went longer than we would have wanted to because we were just getting so much in this living room. And a lot of people said they saw dolls moving in the corner of the room. And then through the spirit box, we get the word dolls. And my stomach dropped out of my body at that point. Because we weren't supposed to do it. Dude, there wasn't supposed to be a doll situation going to the Hinsdale house.
No, when it happened, I remember we had said that we were going to go back, check the footage, see if we could see any dolls moving. We did do that. And to be fair, we couldn't definitively say whether or not we saw dolls moving. It was kind of grainy. It was kind of hard to see.
Yeah.
The camera was, it was tough because it was dark. We only had the red light on. So we couldn't prove it or disprove it one way or another.
Yeah, I think if we were to go back, which this is a place I'd like to go back to, I would want to position a camera closer to the dolls because we had the mounted camera, which was in the top corner of the room, which is kind of behind us, and then we just had the webcam going for the live stream. Honestly, these investigations, like Rob said, we do try to fire up a live stream and interact with the viewers and stuff like that and show people what we're doing that night. It's one of my favorite things that we do. Surprisingly active every time we've done it. I think the SK Pierce mansion, everything went absolutely nuts as soon as we fired up the live stream. Oh, yeah. That was with the whole window thing. But then this one as well. So it wasn't even just the dolls. It wasn't even just the spirit box communication, which is another thing that's very subjective. But everybody in the room heard Andrew's name at least 3 or 4 times. And then it sounded a lot like it said dolls. So, you can go back and watch the footage and see what you think. You heard there was also a full sentence that we straight up couldn't figure out what they said. It was kind of inaudible. I should have probably, usually when we edit these, we replay the spirit box thing a few times, but we had so much other stuff we wanted to play that we didn't bother with any replay footage on that, but you can always rewind it yourself on YouTube. But the spirit box stuff was cool. But then we also it's a new piece of equipment. So we're still figuring it out, but it was the grid sensor. And this one, it immediately, I mean, we had it on for a while and we let it calibrate, but immediately when we started the live stream, we got this silhouette of a person standing off to the left side of the screen, and it was blue. And so I believe the way that this thing works is if it's hotter than room temperature or human or whatever, it's going to pop up as red. And if it's colder than the room temperature, it's going to be blue. Correct. But it wasn't just like later on in the investigation, everything went crazy with the cold sensor. But with this one, it formed the shape of a human being. You could see the head, you could see the neck, you could see the shoulders, and it kind of moved off to the left a little bit. And we did everything we could do to debunk it and figure out, is this picking up on something that's in front of us? It was not. It wasn't there when we started it. It showed up like pretty much immediately when we started the live, which was cool. And then it went away. It kind of like, it didn't just go away. It kind of like slid off the grid to the left. It just kind of like walked off. So very
dolls.
It actually was towards the dolls. That's a good point. Didn't think of that.
Yeah. And then not to bounce around between the different investigations, but when Andrew was investigating that corner where the dolls were, which was Beth's old bedroom, they'd knocked the wall down that separated it from the living room. And he got the motion sensor on the cat ball to go off while he was just sitting there.
Yep. And it was a
that corner as well.
Great shot of it, because you can go back and you can watch Andrew's entire investigation. You see that thing is just sitting on top of, was it on the record player or it was in front of the record player, but it was just sitting there, clear camera view. And you see nothing move. Andrew has this posture of a robot and he sits completely still the entire time. So nothing moved that ball. And the thing went off. Andrew, with his patented 15-second delayed reaction, saw it happen, reacted 15 seconds later to it, thanked them. And while the thing's going off, he's like, "Can you do it again?" It's like, well, if they do it again, it's still going off. But
I think he
cool.
went for the other one because there was another cat ball set up too.
Gotcha. Yeah. He did clarify that he had 2 small balls, so that was good. We got that out of the way in the footage. And the REM pod was going off the whole time too. And if you listen to it, you can hear it beeping. So the REM pod, if it detects something is getting close to it with some sort of electro field, then it will make a sound. It'll also give you a direction on where it was coming from. It was pointing at the dolls. So that REM pod went off at least twice during that video, but several times during his little solo investigation. And that's something. So again, the dolls, we don't know. They just put a bunch of creepy dolls here. You see them in every single haunted location. They fill up usually one room with a whole bunch of creepy dolls. This one was their creepy doll section. There was a doll in a glass case that they said had some sort of a haunted history to it. I don't believe it was tied to the Dandy family at all, but they did bring in an actual haunted doll, and the rest of them were just creepy looking dolls. But several people, when we did that live stream, straight up said in the chat, like, the dolls are moving. I see the head moving. They also saw one of the stuffed teddy bears moving as well. So it wasn't just one of them, but what a strange wrinkle in that story. Not exactly what we thought we were going to walk into, but we'll take it.
I also like to think that if I was the one sitting in the chair where Andrew was when that cat ball went off, that I would have been as stoic and as, calm as Andrew was.
Yeah, you guys have very similar reactions to things.
You've never straight up panicked within 30 seconds of an investigation before. That has never happened.
Doesn't sound like me at all, actually.
Thick Boy Freddy dropping $5 in Super Chat. Says, please delay the reading of the Patreon names for an extra 10 minutes so I can get home. I was stuck in traffic. Absolutely will do, because Thick Boy always, he never disappoints with his Patreon name update. So will do, my friend. And thank you for that $5 donation. You're very generous.
All right, let's wait.
So the living room, super active. I wish we had more time to do more investigation stuff in that room specifically. I mean, even though this house was small, we still weren't able to get to every room to do an investigation. This kind of leads us, Dave, to your investigation down in the basement. And other than you doing karate the entire time.
It was not the entire time.
MMA Dave has to train no matter where he is. Mid paranormal investigation is fine. He's going to get those kicks in.
Just throwing thrust kicks towards the.
It's important when you set up a motion detector to throw a few leg kicks, make sure that it doesn't trip it up.
Exactly. And it worked, because I confirmed that it was not me setting off that motion detector. So we learned from our mistakes, and I think that our mistake with me in that basement was having the SLS and the music detector, the music motion detector at the same time, because the SLS
we don't have an SLS. It was the SP7.
Not SLS, the SP7. Sorry, the SP7 speaker was drowning out the sound of the music box, which was it was really like it added nothing of value to the investigation. It just made it spookier sounding, and it was terrifying.
It did. Yeah, there wasn't a ton on the spirit box that came through. A couple things that we thought maybe could have said something. I think we might have said leave at some point, but again, you never really know what you're getting with the spirit box. Now that you mentioned SLS, that's on the list. I think we're going to try to get one of those for the next one, or an XLS, but should be that's a fun piece of equipment. But but this basement, I think we always have trouble in basements with the SB7 because
it's harder to hear. Well, actually, it's probably better because you're not picking up as much of the actual radio station voices. You're just getting the stuff that comes in between.
That's what you're looking for, yeah. You want the white noise.
Exactly. But this basement was creepy. All basements are creepy, especially the old ones. And this basement was interesting in that sense because it was the old school stone walls. This house was built in the mid 1850s, so that still was a thing. But the weird thing about this basement was the actual size of the basement was smaller than the footprint of the house, which usually suggests that maybe it was something was built there before this house existed. I don't know if that's the case, but I know that sometimes is.
That sometimes is the case. It was actually the case with the Houghton Mansion. I think it was episode 3 that we covered the Houghton Mansion, but the foundation of that house had predated it, because a lot of times when you build a new house, there's no sense to fill in the basement, fill in the foundation just to dig it out again.
Right.
But this one, it looked like they probably could have used a rebuilding of that basement and foundation, because if you look at the way the rocks are and everything, it just doesn't look like it's stable. It seems like it's kind of a miracle that the house hasn't just sunk into the swamp, you know?
Right. But if that's not the actual existing foundation, it does just exist outside of the existing structure. Not outside of the structure, but not supporting the structure.
Right.
You know
and then you're also going to think that if that foundation does predate the house, which I believe is probably the point that you brought it up, what was there before?
Right.
And
exactly.
could these basement hauntings be tied to something completely different? Now, for the most part, I believe the basement was pretty much strictly motion sensor stuff that was getting picked up. A couple things, like we said, probably through the spirit box. We checked the EVPs. We didn't really get any EVPs on the voice recorders in this investigation. It happens. It's fine. We got plenty of other stuff. So, but the motion sensor, the only thing that I could even remotely try to debunk it as would have been maybe it was picking up on rodents. And as me and Rob were going through putting together the investigation episode, we found footage of a mouse, a large mouse or a small rat running through the basement. And at first we're like, oh, we got something on camera. I'm like, oh, that is a mouse. Yeah. So there are mice down there. I mean, could have been a rodent, but it seemed to be too conveniently timed with your questions.
That's what I wanted to bring up, Dave. Do you think it was answering you through the music box?
I think it absolutely could have been. That's what it seemed, because it didn't happen on every question that I asked, but on the majority of them, it came right after I asked the question. So it might have been responding affirmative to certain questions and not responding to negative, but I have no way of confirming that.
Yeah,
it was timed out pretty good. So it felt like something. It definitely looked scary down there.
Soph says the mouse was answering the questions.
The mouse like, yes, you idiot, I'm here. You keep asking me. Give me food. Yeah.
So a lot of people that have gone there think that the basement is, the most haunted, quote unquote, the words we hate, has the most activity is what we'll say, which I just personally think the place as a whole has the most activity. I think that people sort of just, it's because of the aesthetics of the basement. It's a terrifying looking basement. It really reminds me of the North Street house, the Bridgewater house, my grandparents' old house, right? Like when you would go to that house, all of the activity was on the second floor and the basement. The second floor and the attic. But if you went into the basement of that house, it was terrifying. And I don't think we ever got any activity in the basement, right?
Nope.
When we were there?
Correct. Yeah, we would always go down there too, because we're like, all right, someone hit the basement. We kind of leave that bottom floor alone. And then we would focus mainly second floor and attic, mainly the attic actually. But most of the activity that I think we got was on the second floor. But I just think with basements are inherently creepy. Mm-hmm. I mean, the only one that I think that we've investigated where we got the most activity, obviously we got some activity here, was probably the S.K. Pierce mansion, where the basement was probably the craziest part of that investigation. But
for sure.
Yeah. Oliver House was another one. We were disappointed that we didn't get anything in the basement.
Yeah. But I think with a lot of these locations, people like to be like, this room is the most active room, or this basement is the most active room, or most of the activity is going to be in the attic. I think I think with a lot of these houses, these things could just be moving around, especially if it's a residual haunt. You know, it's like the haunting of someone going down to the basement to fix something, or going down to the basement to do some laundry or whatever. They're it could be something residual of something moving up and down. And if you're there at the right time when these events get triggered, could be happening in the kitchen, could be happening in the basement. You could be missing something happening upstairs. We don't know. But all I know is pretty much every spot that we went to, we were getting activity. And
Yeah. Sorry, Elizabeth was asking if there was any bodies in the basement, and there's nothing confirmed on that front. They did bring in that psychic Alex Tannis, and he had a vision of seeing 7 bodies in the crawl space that were probably not murdered in the house, according to him, murdered on this wagon trail and then stored there until they disposed of them. There's no confirmation on that at all. There's no way to confirm it. You'll never be able to know for sure. But that's something that he saw with 7 different spirits that were killed 7 different ways and stored in the crawl space there.
Right. So I think the theory was that there was some guys who used to live in the area or in the house. Again, I don't think there's anything that actually backs this up factual, and the idea was that they were doing stagecoach robberies and killing people and storing them in that crawl space. So could be true. Can't rule it out.
I want to clarify something real quick. So Allison asks, so if the basement in an old house is smaller than the house may have been built on an existing foundation in some cases. So in some cases there are, for instance, when they build additions onto houses, they don't always extend the basement. So that's not the case in every situation, but in a lot of them. For instance, the house I live in was built in mid-1940s, but there is a much smaller, the basement is way smaller than the actual footprint of the house, and it's stone, which they weren't doing back in the 1940s. So my house is an example of a building where there was an existing building before my house, and there's actually documentation of that, but it's not this case with every house. There's additions, and sometimes old houses, when they had root cellars, they would make those smaller than the actual house because there was no reason to dig out the entire foundation of the house.
Yeah. Can you tell us any more about the basement, Dave? Like what you were feeling as you were down there? Anything else you want to bring up about the basement?
There wasn't much else because I was pretty distracted by the motion sensor going off and trying to figure out if I could debunk it as something not paranormal, and also being creeped out by it because it was a creepy dark basement and there was a spooky music box going off.
Yeah, for sure.
Being triggered by something in that crawl space.
So for those of you unfamiliar with how the motion sensor that we have, the motion sensor that we have, it works like any other motion sensor, but instead of just lighting up, it plays this little music box thing. It's the creepiest little tune. It also lights up, which is good for the cameras. And but the song is unbelievably creepy. Yeah. It was also hilarious that when you walked by it scared the shit out of you. But then you were good enough to acknowledge, like, hey, that was me walking by it. You know, not just gonna BS it or whatever.
Yeah.
So this leads us to the final investigation of the night, which was supposed to be me solo in Mary's room. Went in there. We were like,
bravely immediately called for backup.
I was like, how are we going to set up a camera? The dumbest thing we did in this investigation, Jesse, was not miking you up, knowing you were going to be in there, but we were trying to keep it so that it was just a solo investigation for me. But you're in there. We should have mic'd you up. But that's the only thing that I'm, a little upset about in that aspect. But
I think the only reason I didn't think about that, and the reason that it was so hard to get 2 cameras going in that room, was it was so tiny, so tiny. Like the cameras don't even do it justice. I remember I was watching a few investigations on the house before we went up there, and they're like, "This house is so small. This house is so small." I'm like, "It doesn't look that small." Then when we got there, I'm like, "It is. It is. Every room is tiny." And this was probably the second smallest bed. Oh, they were all small bedrooms, dude. They were all like closets. They were, and unbelievably small, but it made sense as to why you needed me there.
Yeah. So we do this investigation, and we thought, so the one thing that, there's a lot of things that happened here, but the one thing that really took me by surprise was how much we actually got on the spirit box when we thought we weren't getting a lot on it at the time. So killing it probably was not the play at the point that we killed it, but it still worked out. I mean, there was something in that room is all I can say. It felt suffocating while we were in there, and it just kept escalating, and it felt angry. I don't even know how to describe it other than like, it felt like something in there was not happy we were in there.
Right. And that was kind of the vibe that we were getting. It's not really like we were getting communications that was telling us like, hey, get out, or targeting either one of us. We were getting some intelligent responses, which was really cool. But what we were picking up on for audio listeners, we're using the grid, and it gives you a few different things. So for one, it projects a grid onto the wall. And if anything crosses into that grid, it'll show up on the motion sensor. There's a little screen that'll show you the shape of whatever is popping up in front of you on the sensor. So if a human being walks into it, you would get the silhouette of a human being, and it would show up as red because it's hotter than what's inside the room. So we set up, we let it calibrate for a while. And then a few minutes into the investigation, we start getting this little blue blip on it, and it's ping-ponging kind of from side to side, from like top corner to the other top corner. And it's just kind of going back and forth, just one little tiny dot. And then it starts getting bigger, and it bigger and bigger and bigger as the investigation goes. And I think we had to cut down for airing it purposes. Probably we were up there for at least over an hour. We cut it down to about 10 to 15 minutes in the video. And you can see the progression of this thing just growing and growing and growing. And the temperature was fluctuating. And I was watching an interview with, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he had lived in the house for a period of time. Do you remember what that video you sent us, Rob? What was his name? Do you remember?
No.
Either you? No? Okay. Well, anyways, they did a good job. They took our video and they just broke it down and said what they've experienced. And I fully enjoyed watching this. Complete strangers. We didn't ask them to do it. And they found our investigation. They went through it piece by piece. And this is from someone who had lived in the house. And he was saying that in that room in particular, these temperature drops, what we experienced was what they would experience as well. He was saying it would be 85 degrees up there. Then all of a sudden, for no reason, it would drop down to like 60 degrees, 65 degrees. And we were seeing that. We saw at least a 7-degree shift while we were up there. Quick. And yeah, it was quick. And then it would go back up, and it would go back down and go back up. So I do wonder if maybe that was kind of what was triggering that screen to do what it was doing, was the temperature fluctuations. And because it was only reading as red. So it was only reading as cold. I mean, I'm sorry, it was only reading as blue as cold. So it was such a weird amount of things to happen in that brief time. And then we also were getting the communication through the spirit box.
Well, I think the most important part of this in particular investigation was what you pointed out during it, when you realized as we reacted more, it almost like grew stronger, right? So when we were reacting, it would envelop the screen even more, like it was getting closer. Like, oh, we're scaring them, let's keep doing it, right? Like that, like almost like they were taunting us. So that's the way I took it, and I thought that was a really good observation you made.
Yeah. So again, it was a new piece of equipment, and we did our research on it and how to use it and everything, and it just didn't seem to be anything that was normal. For example, like when we had it set up in the living room, we caught that one little detection of the figure, and then it moved off to the side. And this isn't like a phone-based app, these ghost hunting apps where they have a pre-programmed bunch of crap, like most of that stuff that you get. And I understand there's a couple of decent ones, but most of those phone app ghost hunting things that you download are just absolute nonsense. This isn't that. This is an actual piece of hardware. So there was some things that we couldn't explain, but what I was going to say was downstairs in the living room, when you set that up, we got that one detection, and then it went away, and then we got nothing else. There was a small temperature shift in the living room, but it didn't cause what happened when the temperature shift happened upstairs, which was the whole screen slowly started filling up. And Chrissy mentions that it was a full moon that night also. Could have had something to do with it.
Good point. Yeah, so overall, I know we want to go back to places. I'd love to go back to the Oliver House. I'm going to just say that the Hinsdale House, for my go back places, has slid to the top of the list. I want
a lot of it just the setting, right? Where it is, how isolated it is. And I kind of like the small town vibe too.
Oh, I love the small town vibe. I love that there's no noise contamination, right? Even the Oliver House,
except for the screeching banshees in the woods.
Yeah, except for the banshees that won't shut the hell up. That are coming to kill us.
We're trying to get evidence of ghosts. Tell the banshees to shut up. Yeah.
But even the Oliver House, it's set back a little bit, but it's right next to Route 44, so you have to constantly be making sure you're not hearing something coming from there, right? It's just being by itself is like, it was so nice to really not have to try to debunk a bunch of different sounds. And we still did. We still try to debunk, what could it possibly be? But the options are very limited for it being some sort of man-made sound or, animal sound. Well, not animal sound, it's in the woods, but that's kind of what you're dealing with there. I love it. I want to go back. Scared the hell out of me. I was also strong and brave and handsome, to quote.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
So,
Rob, you've never been brave on any investigation.
I've been so brave. I stayed.
You did.
He did not leave. He did not pull the ultimate Rob move of just leaving.
Just walking away. Just walk home.
I have not Irish goodbye'd one investigation yet.
That's true.
Not one at this moment.
You actually do the opposite of that. You show up like 3 days early to every investigation
To get all
like,
the
Rob, we got an investigation going on Saturday. He's like, I know, I'm already there. I'm like, all right.
got to get some footage. And then we forget to take a bunch of footage of the outside of the house.
We live and we learn, We're good. We're still new at this. But we're figuring it out as we go. But
Dave, do you want to give some closing thoughts on the Hinsdale House?
Yeah, I'm with you on revisitability. Is that a word?
It is.
sounds like it.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
revisitability. Right at the top of the list. I would love to go back there. I don't know if I'd drive. I'd probably fly into Buffalo if we do, because that was a long drive. Got hit with a speeding ticket on the way back, which is unfortunate because I couldn't fight it because it was too far to drive to go to court for the day.
Mm.
Oh, by the way, I figured they hit us with like a $95 charge on top of the speeding ticket. It's just like a New York State thing, I guess. They just whack you with an extra $100 just cause. Like,
that was the Massachusetts tax. That's just like, well,
yeah.
Massachusetts, he sucks. Yeah, he's not going to fight it. Too far of a drive. We'll catch him for speeding again if he tries. Yeah.
It's like if I was going to do that, I would have fought it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the investigation. So that's the Hinsdale House. I mean, there's a lot more to it. Like I said, we'll link the book in the show notes below. I also bought a book from there. I haven't read it yet, but they had a few of them for sale there. But that's quite the story, man. It's just one of those ones where it's like, I got this in a few ones where I'd buy the book on the investigation. I think it was This House is Haunted book about Enfield. And I was like, well, I can't leave that out. I can't leave this out. Can't leave that out.
Yeah.
And then you have to shave it off. So it's like, go back, read the books, check it out. The story is nuts. And the house did not disappoint. Maybe we were there on the right night, the right time, but it was such an active place. So, and what an ideal situation.
Check it out. Watch the investigation. Want to jump into some 5-star reviews?
Yes.
All right, let's start with Amanda, who actually wrote this on Facebook because she listens on iHeartRadio, and iHeartRadio, step your game up. Let these people leave reviews for us on iHeartRadio. But she did it on Facebook. This is from Amanda. Consider this my 5-star review because I don't have Apple or Spotify. I listen on iHeartRadio. I absolutely love your podcast, and I love you guys more. I've never liked a podcast enough to join Discord, whatever the hell that is. Still trying to figure out how to use it. I listen to episodes I have already heard just because you guys make me laugh out loud, and no other podcast compares. My husband is always busting my chops for having you on. Love the haunted headlines, hunting for haunted objects, and haunted treasures. Finally getting on board with watching on YouTube Live as well. Love you long time. LOL. So thank you, Amanda, for that.
Also, just to shout out Discord real quick, it's definitely worth figuring it out because our Discord channel is fantastic. So it's popping off.
Yeah. Huge shout out to Steph, Papa Squatch. Tess has been very active in there. Everybody else that's in Discord going nuts. So love it. Love it. When I made that channel, I was like, well, no one's going to join this. And then it worked out. It was good. It was good. We also got a review on Spotify from Sean Johnson. Very straight to the point. It says videos on Spotify, 5 stars. Hell yeah. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that.
And we got a couple on Apple that we haven't gotten to as well. And I'm just going to read these in order real quick. So the first one's from Kristen, titled Entertaining. I'm glad I found this podcast. I listen to this as I work remote at home in data entry, which is pretty mind-numbing. As someone who grew up seeing ghosts and hearing stories, I love the spooky narrative and history and general hijinks of the show. I need to email you all my stories from Maryland. Another one would be to look up would be Point Lookout and the Lord Biltmore Hotel. Keep it up. So a couple of recommendations there. This is from SMP 87, just simply titled Love. Just found this podcast 2 days ago and have literally been binging it. I'm on episode 23 now, and I have talked to Tess and asked her if you guys have. I know it's crazy, right? And asked her if you have heard of the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Super stoked to hear that episode. You guys are bomb. Love the banter between you. Haven't been on the YouTube channel yet. I listen on podcasts while I'm at work all day, but I laugh all day. It's the best thing I've found yet.
I'm just doing some math real quick, right? We're at an hour 23 right now. Our episodes are usually around an hour. 27 episodes in 2 days. That's dedication.
I will say we were shorter on some of our initial
earlier
episodes.
ones. That's a good point.
That's true.
So
That's
this one's from JP Tatum, titled Antietam. I've been listening for a while. Hometown Ghost Stories is my favorite podcast. The Antietam show was so good, well researched, well delivered. I typically listen in my car while driving to work. I walked in a bit late just to finish listening to this one. I had watched it on YouTube the night before. I love the banter and the interaction between Rob, Jesse, and Dave, and I love the interaction with the HTGS community. I look forward to every new episode. Keep up the good work. Thanks for putting in all the work and for all of us to enjoy. And that's from Janet. And I have one final one from Samantha, I believe. Samantha Mac, titled Fantastic. That's how it's spelled. I enjoy the layout of the show. First, you get a good synopsis of the topic, followed by discussion where you feel like you're amongst friends. So some 5-star reviews that we've missed the last few weeks, but glad to get through them today.
We will get to them. If you want your review read out, just leave us a 5-star review, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever. And just, if it's one of those weird ones where they don't let you leave a review, iHeartRadio or whatever, just email it, send it on Facebook. We'll see it eventually. So
we'll find it. So at some point we'll find it.
Yes, indeed. Before I hop into the patrons, I do want to once again thank everyone who donated today. It was a really busy day. So Crazy Legs, Potato, Tess, Blow Me in Chicago, Apple Steph, and Sharon with a big one, Andrew P, Thick Boy Freddy. Thank you guys so much for your donations. That was unbelievable. So a lot of gifted YouTube subs. If you're new to YouTube memberships, you unlock the YouTube emotes. And I believe today alone should unlock at least 1 or 2 new slots. So throw it in Discord. I don't know if we have a channel set up for that yet, like emote suggestions, but we'll design some new ones for this week. But let's hop into our patrons, starting with our VIPs. We have Tess, Dave D, Kate and Steve M, Blazora, Glitter Tees, Cammy from Washington, Siobhan, not Sharon, Kelly C, Jennifer P, who's today's RIP. Again, not dead, doing fine. Jennifer P, when we say RIP, that means really important person or reluctantly ice skating platypus. One of those two things, could be that. We have Nick, Donnie N, Inspires Gaming, Allison V, Robert H, Anna C, J9, Mallory K, Mom and Pops Wilkins, Lisa J, and still hoping the Onania Club gets released someday. So thank you so much for being VIPs. Next up, we will hop into the Warren's Wards. Let's kick that off with the one and only Shawners. We also have Apple Steph, Leslie F, Michelle, Rachel G, Her Lady Spookship, Nefarious Chadpoles, Wahini Pirate, I Am the Bridge Witch, and I Hate Rob, Julie Gooley, Eugene M, Kath Q, MMA Dave, Staying in Shape by Fighting Mini Ghosts. You didn't have to say mini ghosts. Why did you Dave like that? It could have been ghosts.
Mice ghosts.
Ones. Yeah. Could have been mini mice. Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah. I never heard Minnie Mouse plural.
I would never fight Minnie Mouse.
What about mini mice?
Mini mice, maybe.
Changes the odds. We have DC, Chris Connolly, LBPS founder, next HTGS guest, the other Rachel B, Sarah Cook, Stitch Kitten, Ambi Rose, Janice G, Lily, Rachel B, Rob's internet is ... We have a demon child that is planning a slow death on you. Papa Squatch, I'm the thorn branch that attacked Jesse Steffe. Stan the man with the ham hands and loving it. Thank you so much for being part of the Warren's Wards. And finally, we have the Ghost Pirate Mafia.
Before we get into that, quick shout out to Lily. Just had her baby last week, I believe. Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. A cute baby it is. So awesome stuff. Love to see the family grow. Right. Thick Boy Freddy really means his apology and would like to come back inside now. It's really hot outside. Christina S, Kate C, Chrissy, Kelly C, Ela Dennis. See, this is the one where she's like, you said it right. And then I can't remember which time I said it right. So maybe Isla Dennis. This is going to happen every week.
Every week.
Yep.
It's a fun game.
I'm going to go with Isla. Isla sounds right. Cyclone Richard Twirler. Oh, I understand. Crazy Legs.
Yeah. They nerfed it for.
Thank you for that.
Yes. The Potato Geist 3, Au Gratin Rising. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. But it's Potato Guys 3. Potato with a few donations today as well. Absolute legend. WV Coal Miner, hashtag Dave, please kill Rob. The trick-or-treater that purposely skips Rob's house. Bree not Brianna. Miss Macabre. Team Jesse forever. Yes. Naroku, Cold Warrior, Master Bacon. We'll allow it. I like that. That's good. I have come here to create witty Patreon names and subscribe to creators. And I'm all out of witty Patreon names. But it still was. D from H-Town, Meta A. Sarah B. Dominica, still waiting for you, the Winchester Mystery House. Monster Mom 04, Allie, Dark Snark, I Hate Jesse, also known as the mini soft serve manlet, king of the munchkin manlets.
Added to it.
I don't think that's ever going to die down. That's here to stay. Megan S. Morgan S. A ghost walks into a bar, orders a beer and a mop. Love it. Sharon V. Marie R. Arcade Hunters Wayne C. Blow me. Crystal Quinn, not you, Wayne. That's Nancy's name. Thank you, Wayne. Crystal Quinn, Colby just drove 3,400 kilometers home and is way too drunk to communicate. Well, hopefully you got drunk after you drove home. Please be safe there, Colby. We like having you around. We don't want to give out a actual RIP to our patrons. Daddy Rob is the greatest. Thick Boy Freddy eats Jesse's farts. Alicia E. Thick Boy Freddy loves Thick Wife very much and is sorry he allegedly said Rob sucks Dave's farts. Hashtag Team Daddy Rob. Is there another person?
How many Patreon Thick Boy Freddy's are there?
I think someone else just had a Thick Boy Freddy name as well. I love it. All right, we started an army. I am the Lorax and I speak for the trees, and for some reason they are screaming. Ah! Dave's karate will save Jesse from the evil baby thorn. Oh, stop. It wasn't a baby thorn. It was a big thorn. Sam from Nepal, Joe Curtains for address R, Paul from St. Louis, Al Capone. I miss when the shows are all about me. Huggy Bear. I can't think of a clever Patreon name, so yay. Mariah M. And then page 2, Kira Lee J. Anthony. My attention span is as short as Rob T. Cody G, Brandon W, Hooply Whooply, Bridge Witch, and Corn Drew. Thank you so much for being on Patreon. Whew, that's a big long list. We love that.
Yeah.
But it is because of that list that we're able to do episodes like we did tonight, which is live investigation episodes. So thank you to everybody who donated. Thank you to everybody who's on Patreon. We love you all. Absolutely.
We do. If you're in the live chat, we're going to play something for you afterwards too.
Oh, yeah, we did a little commercial for Paramount Plus. So we're going to play that. Surprised that they actually liked it. So there's a little spoiler for you. This is the dumbest thing we've ever made in our fucking lives, but we're going to play it for you so you can agree. But that is it for this week. Stick around after the broadcast. Thank you all so much. This was a new high in viewership, and we love seeing that every single time. That's awesome. And I think that will pretty much do it. We are brave, strong, and handsome, and we'll see you next week. Bye.